years old when this happened, and I lived alone in a small ground-floor apartment in rural Wisconsin. It was a low, old building with 4 units total, all on the same level, in a very quiet residential neighborhood. I was a university student and had moved there because the rent was cheap and it was relatively close to campus. At that point in my life, I basically lived between classes, a part-time job and long nights studying or watching whatever helped me shut my brain off. My neighbors were discreet. I almost never saw anyone coming or going. The place was too quiet at night, but I had gotten used to it. That particular night, it was raining nonstop. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, heavy rain that made everything damp and suffocating. I was sitting on the living room couch with a dim light on, using my laptop, when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't timid either. 2 dry knocks, well-spaced. I glanced at the clock on the corner of the screen. It was a little after 10 at night. That immediately put me on alert, because no one ever showed up there at that hour, especially on a rainy night. I got up slowly and went to the door without opening it, just pressing my ear against it to listen more closely. I heard a male voice on the other side speaking in a polite, almost rehearsed tone. He said he thought he had knocked on the wrong apartment and asked if he could use my phone because his cell phone had stopped working due to the rain. While he spoke, I could hear water running along the sidewalk and dripping from the building's eaves. His voice didn't sound upset or rushed. It was far too calm for someone standing in the rain at that hour. I replied through the door, saying I couldn't help and that he could try another apartment or use a nearby gas station phone. There was a short pause, as if he were thinking about what to say next. It was during that pause that something made me look toward the living room's side window, the one just a few feet from the door. The curtain was partially open, and the streetlight cast weak light onto the side yard of the building. There, just out of the direct line of sight from the door, I saw a second silhouette standing still. I couldn't make out details, just the shape of someone standing motionless near the wall, outside the door's field of view. My stomach dropped instantly. The person didn't move, didn't try to hide when I looked. They were just there, as if that position had been chosen deliberately. I turned my attention back to the door, feeling my entire body tense. On the other side of the door, the man thanked me, but his tone shifted slightly. He didn't become aggressive, just less polite. He insisted, saying it would only take a minute, that he was soaked and needed to call someone to pick him up. I said again that I couldn't open the door and that I didn't feel comfortable. There was another pause, longer this time. The rain kept falling, and that silence between responses started to feel heavy. Then he said something like, "Okay," and stepped away from the door. I didn't hear hurried footsteps or curses, just the sound of him walking slowly along the front of the building, as if leaving without any urgency. I waited a few seconds before moving. I went back to the side window. The second silhouette was still there, but now it seemed a little closer to the building wall, as if it had adjusted its position. I still couldn't see a face, only the dark outline against the wet wall. What was worse was realizing that while the man at the door was walking away, this person hadn't moved to go with him. They stayed there standing still, as if they had a different role. My heart started pounding harder, and I felt that clear sense that something had been wrong from the start. This didn't feel like a wrong address. After a few moments, I heard footsteps again, but not returning to the door. They were farther away, moving around the building. It was a wet, slow sound, like someone walking through the soaked grass behind the units. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, trying to decide if I was being paranoid. The rain muffled some noises, but it also made certain sounds stand out when they didn't belong. I looked through the peephole in the front door and saw no one. That only made the feeling worse. If he had really left, I should have heard footsteps moving away toward the street. A few seconds later, I heard a light tap, not on the door, but somewhere toward the back of the apartment. I moved slowly into the kitchen, feeling the cold floor under my feet, and looked at the back window. The curtain was closed, but I could see shadows moving outside, distorted by the weak light and the rain. They weren't fast movements. They were deliberate, like someone positioning themselves, testing angles. I went completely silent, holding my breath, afraid even the sound of my body might give away that I was there. I stood there for a stretch of time I can't measure, just listening. The rain fell steadily, making everything harder to distinguish, but also making certain sounds stand out when they didn't fit. I heard a faint scraping, like someone brushing against the exterior wall, followed by the short sound of breathing far too close to the back window. This wasn't someone passing by. This was someone standing still. The idea of opening the curtain to look gave me an immediate physical fear, as if my entire body were telling me not to do it. I leaned my head back slightly and stared at the reflection in the glass, trying to catch any movement without exposing myself. That was when I saw marks beginning to appear on the glass, irregular lines left by water running off something touching it from outside. A few seconds later, a hand appeared clearly on the other side of the glass, pressing lightly against the window. It didn't knock. It didn't force anything. It just stayed there, open, fingers spread, leaving well-defined wet marks before slowly pulling away. My stomach turned instantly. This didn't look like someone trying to break in. It looked like someone checking, testing for a reaction, to see if a light turned on if someone approached. I stayed completely still, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard outside. The hand disappeared, but the footsteps continued moving slowly along the back of the building, as if someone were circling the entire structure. After that, the sounds gradually moved farther away. Slow, wet footsteps retreating behind the building until they were swallowed by the constant noise of the rain. I stayed frozen for several more minutes, not moving, waiting to hear anything return. Nothing did. Silence took over the apartment again, broken only by the sound of rain and the distant hum of a transformer on the street. I didn't move, didn't turn on any lights, didn't go near the door. The feeling wasn't relief, it was suspension, like something had been interrupted before it finished. Only when the rain began to ease close to midnight was I able to sit back down on the couch, still fully dressed, unable to relax. I waited until morning to work up the courage to check the rest of the apartment. When daylight filtered weakly through the windows, I went first to the front door. Nothing out of place, no obvious marks. Then I went to the back. The windows had clear, wet handprints smeared across the glass in more than one spot, as if someone had stood there more than once. These weren't random rain splashes. They were defined impressions of fingers and palms, slowly streaking downward. The ground near the exterior wall was more trampled than the rest. The grass flattened, forming a short back-and-forth path. That was when I knew the knock at the door hadn't been a mistake. It had only been the beginning. I spent the rest of the morning in a strange state, like I was slightly outside my own body. I showered, changed clothes, but everything felt automatic. Every time I passed near the back windows, I looked at the glass expecting to see another mark appear. I wiped the wet handprints with paper towels, but even after cleaning, they were still visible under certain light, as if the water had only revealed something that was already there. I called a classmate and told him what had happened, trying to keep my voice neutral. He said it could have just been drunk people, but stopped talking when I described the second silhouette and the hands on the window. There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line before he said, "Maybe I should notify the building's owner." I spoke to the landlord that same afternoon. He listened carefully, asked a few practical questions, and said it wasn't the first time someone had complained about wrong knocks on rainy nights. He mentioned it like a minor detail, something that just happens. That bothered me more than if he'd seemed surprised. I asked if the police had ever been called. He said yes, but that they never found anyone when they arrived. According to him, it was always someone asking for help. Wrong address, similar story. I hung up with a strange weight in my chest. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a simple method. Knock, talk, observe who reacts, who opens, who stays silent. That night I barely slept. Any sound of rain hitting the roof or a car moving slowly down the street made me lift my head instantly. I kept thinking about how everything had happened in layers. First the polite knock, the simple request. Then the pause. The second person out of sight. The shift in tone. The movement around the building. The hands on the window. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was impulsive. It didn't feel like someone desperate for help. It felt like someone evaluating space, time, reaction. I started to realize that if I had opened the door, the story probably would have gone in a very different direction. And that was what disturbed me the most. The sense that the most important decision had been made in the first few seconds, when I still thought it was just someone lost in the rain. A few days later, while talking to a neighbor in the next building, I casually mentioned the knock. She looked visibly uncomfortable and said that the previous winter something similar had happened to a woman who lived alone nearby. A man knocked saying he had the wrong address, and when she opened the door just a little, she noticed another person standing out of sight. She closed it immediately. Afterward, they found marks on the back windows. They never found out who it was. Hearing that gave me the same cold feeling I'd had on the rainy night. It wasn't an isolated mistake, it wasn't bad luck. Someone was using the simplest excuse possible to test who would open the door. To this day, when it rains at night and someone knocks, I don't go near the door. And every time I think about those wet handprints on the glass, the only thing that comes to mind is that the wrong address was never the real mistake. After that, I started noticing small things I had completely ignored before. The way people stood near the building without a clear reason, cars parked with engines off on rainy nights, footsteps that didn't follow a direct path. Nothing else ever happened to me, but the feeling of having been watched like that never went away. I started locking everything earlier, keeping lights off, and never responding to knocks at night without first checking every possible angle. That night taught me that not every threat comes with urgency or violence. Sometimes it comes with politeness, patience, and a request that's just a little too simple to be real. And the most frightening part is realizing how well that works. Even today, when I think back to that knock on the door, what bothers me most isn't the man who spoke to me. It's the second silhouette, standing out of sight, waiting. They never said a word, never moved to draw attention. They were just there, as part of the plan. The wet handprints on the windows were the only concrete proof that it had crossed the line from coincidence. It wasn't someone lost. It was someone testing, and knowing that I only fully understood that, after it was already too late to pretend it was an innocent mistake, is the kind of thing that changes how you see any knock on the door on a rainy night. Story 2. I was 27 years old when this happened, and I worked at a clothing store inside a shopping mall in rural North Carolina. It wasn't a large or busy place, and at night it became completely empty. That day I had stayed later than usual closing the register and organizing inventory because a coworker hadn't shown up. I left the mall a little after 11:30 at night. Most of the interior lights were already off, with only a few emergency lights still on, and the parking lot felt far too large with no one there. Normally I parked near other open stores, but since the mall was already closed, I parked closer to a side exit out of habit, so I wouldn't have to walk around too much. When I got out of the car, I felt that heavy silence typical of a large, empty place at night. No voices, no distant music, just a light wind and the occasional sound of an insect. I locked the door, adjusted my bag on my shoulder, and started walking toward the side entrance that was still open for employees. That was when I heard someone call out to me. A calm, male voice coming from a few parking spaces ahead. I looked and saw a man standing near a dark car with the hood raised. He lifted his hand slightly and said his car had broken down and that he needed help pushing it to a darker area, where he said his cell phone signal worked better. The request sounded strange to me right away, but I still tried to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe it was just someone who needed help. I stopped where I was and looked at him without getting closer. The distance between us wasn't large, but it felt bigger because of the emptiness around us. His car really did have the hood open, but I didn't see anyone working on it or any tools on the ground. He kept talking, saying it was just a short push and wouldn't even take a minute. As he explained, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. Another car slowly entered the parking lot with its headlights off and stopped behind mine, aligned in a way that partially blocked the exit. It didn't make the sound of braking or accelerating. It just positioned itself there silently. My body reacted instantly. My heart started racing, and I felt that cold sensation rise in my stomach, as if all the pieces suddenly no longer fit together. The man in front of me kept talking in the same calm tone, as if nothing had changed. He didn't look at the car that had stopped behind me, which made it even stranger. It was as if he already knew that would happen. I took a step back without answering, squeezed my car keys tightly in my hand, and said I couldn't help. He tried to smile and took a step toward me, saying I was overreacting and that it would be quick. At that moment, I didn't think about anything else. I turned around, unlocked my car, and got in as fast as I could. I heard a car door open behind me, but I didn't wait to see whose it was. I started the engine and took off, maneuvering around the car that was parked as best I could, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my throat. I left the parking lot without looking back, passing through the side gate almost too fast. Only when I reached the main avenue, with other cars passing by, was I able to slow down a little. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I felt a strange metallic taste in my mouth from the nerves. I kept telling myself that I had overreacted, that maybe it was just a coincidence, but the image of the second car positioning itself behind mine wouldn't leave my mind. That hadn't been random. It wasn't someone arriving by chance. The way everything happened, without haste, without communication between them, felt far too rehearsed to be improvised. I drove straight home without stopping anywhere, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. That night I barely slept. Every time I heard a car pass on the street, my body reacted as if I were back in that empty parking lot. The next day, I told a coworker what had happened, more to organize my thoughts than anything else. She stayed silent for a few seconds and then said that another employee had mentioned something similar weeks earlier, also in the parking lot, also late at night. At the time, no one had taken it very seriously. That left me uneasy for the rest of the day. I started thinking that the request for help might have been something repeated, tested on different people, always waiting for someone to agree to push the car to a darker area. Late that same afternoon, I decided to call mall management. Not to file a formal complaint, but to let them know that something strange had happened in the parking lot the night before. I spoke with a supervisor who seemed more interested in ending the call than in hearing details. Even so, I mentioned the car with the hood open, the request to go to an unlit area, and the other vehicle that had positioned itself behind me. There was a pause on the other end of the line before he said that night the parking lot cameras had been undergoing maintenance. According to him, they had been turned off for a few hours. That sent a chill through me. It wasn't an unexpected technical problem. It was something scheduled. The coincidence was far too big to ignore. I asked if anyone else had complained about a strange approach. He said there was no official record, but mentioned in a lower voice that a driver had called earlier that day reporting a similar situation. A man asking for help pushing a car, another vehicle appearing shortly after. The difference was that this driver had also left quickly without helping. The time, according to him, was just minutes after mine. When I hung up, I sat there staring at the wall for a while, feeling that heavy confirmation in my chest. It hadn't been improvised. Someone was deliberately using that empty parking lot, counting on the darkness, the silence, and the automatic instinct that helping is the right thing to do. After that, I started paying attention to local news and comments in city groups. Nothing explicit appeared, no major articles, but I saw vague mentions of strange approaches in empty parking lots, always late at night. Nothing with names, nothing with clear descriptions, just generic warnings. That made me even more uneasy, because it felt like something people talked about in low voices, as if they didn't want to sound alarmist. I caught myself doing the same thing, choosing my words carefully when I told the story, leaving out details that together were exactly what made everything feel so wrong. The request to go to a dark area. The second car appearing without headlights, the cameras being off. Separately, they could seem like coincidences. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I changed my routine immediately. I started leaving work accompanied whenever possible, let family members know the exact time I got home, and stopped parking in isolated areas, even during the day. That experience made it clear how a large, empty place can become a problem when someone decides to use the space as a tool. The silence, the lack of witnesses, the absence of working cameras, all of it worked together. The hardest thing to process wasn't the momentary fear, but the realization that someone had planned that approach, counting on other people's goodwill and the automatic habit of helping. It wasn't improvised. It was a repeated attempt. A few weeks later, I happened to meet the person who had made the other report. We didn't know about each other until the subject came up in a small group of employees. When she described the approach, I felt an immediate chill. It was the same story, almost word for word. A man with a broken car, a request to push it to a darker area, a tone that was far too calm. In her case, the second car appeared on the other side, not behind her, but the feeling was the same. She also refused and left. Neither of us could explain exactly why, only that something felt too wrong to ignore. Talking to someone who had experienced almost the same thing erased any doubt I still had. It wasn't bad luck. It was method. To this day, when I think about that night, what bothers me most isn't the approach itself. It's the control. Someone chose the time, the empty location, the request that appeals to helping, and even the absence of cameras. Everything seemed calculated to leave the other person with no clear options and very little time to think. If I had taken one more step, if I had agreed to push the car just a little, I don't know where that would have ended. Knowing that another driver was approached minutes later makes it clear that it wasn't personal. I was just the next attempt. There was never an official investigation, never an arrest, at least not that I know of. The parking lot is still there, the same, silent at night. But for me, that place was never neutral again. Every time I pass by, I remember that danger doesn't always come running or shouting. Sometimes it comes calmly, politely, asking for help in the right place at the right time, counting on someone agreeing to go where no one is watching. And understanding that completely changed the way I trust requests made in the dark. Story 3. I was 39 years old when this happened, and I was traveling alone through New Mexico for work. It was one of those long trips, driving for hours on straight roads, empty landscapes, and very little open at night. I planned to leave early the next day, so I looked for any cheap motel just to sleep for a few hours. I stopped at one of those roadside motels, simple, old, with rooms lined up and parking right in front. The kind of place you don't stay any longer than necessary. I checked in quickly, took the physical key and went straight to the room. I didn't see other guests coming or going, just one car parked farther down. The place was quiet with that dry wind typical of the region and a dusty smell in the air. The room was extremely basic: a bed, a small table, a tiny bathroom, and a door that opened directly onto the parking lot. I locked the door as soon as I went in, out of habit, and also slid the interior chain. I set my things out to leave early, took a quick shower, and turned off the light. It must have been just after midnight. I was too tired to stay alert, but I remember thinking that the silence there was different, deeper, as if sound had nowhere to go. The air conditioner made an irregular noise, turning on and off, and aside from that, there was nothing. I fell asleep quickly, without imagining that I wouldn't really rest that night. I woke up to a low sound coming from the door. At first I thought it was part of a dream, the kind of noise your mind invents when you're between sleep and waking. But the sound repeated, clearer. It was the metallic noise of a key being inserted into the lock. Not a confused rattling, but a careful movement, almost too precise. I heard the key turn to a certain point and stop, as if it had almost worked. There was a long, silent pause, and then the movement repeated. My entire body snapped awake at that moment. I stayed completely still in bed, trying to figure out whether this was someone trying the wrong room or something else. The sound came back a third time, always the same way. Key goes in, turns, jams, stops. The pauses between each attempt were what bothered me the most. They weren't quick seconds. They were long intervals, as if whoever was outside was thinking, listening, adjusting their hand on the key. I didn't hear footsteps, voices, or any sign of frustration. Just that almost successful attempt repeated patiently. I looked toward the door in the dark, trying to see if the handle was moving, but I couldn't make it out. The silence of the rest of the motel made everything sharper. It didn't sound like a drunk person at the wrong door. It sounded like someone carefully trying the same thing, waiting for it to work at some point. I lay there without moving, counting my breaths mentally so I wouldn't make noise. The key turned again, this time with a bit more pressure. I heard the metal scrape inside the lock, that dry sound you only hear when something almost fits. The door vibrated slightly, enough for me to feel it through the bed. After that, another long pause. No footsteps moving away. No sigh. Just the clear feeling that someone was still on the other side, standing there, hand still on the key. My heart was pounding so hard that I started worrying it could be heard from outside. When the key tried to turn again, I made a split-second decision. I turned on the room light all at once and slammed my hand hard against the wall near the door. making noise on purpose. I shouted something I don't even remember, just a loud sound to make it clear that someone was awake inside. The reaction was immediate. The key stopped in the middle of the movement. There was no further attempt. I didn't hear the key being yanked out in a hurry or footsteps running away. There was only a sudden, dense silence, as if everything had frozen for a few seconds. After that, nothing. No more sound at the door. I stood in the middle of the room with the light on, staring at the door for several minutes. I didn't get closer. I didn't say anything else. I just listened. The air conditioner turned on and off, and that familiar sound almost made me laugh nervously. I expected to hear footsteps moving away across the parking lot, a car door slamming, anything that would indicate the person had left. I heard none of that. It was as if whoever had been outside had simply vanished. After a while, that felt far too long. I turned off the light and sat on the bed, unable to lie down again. Sleep was completely gone. I spent the rest of the night awake, glancing at the door from time to time, waiting for the key to start turning again. It didn't happen. The silence lasted until the sky began to lighten slightly through the gap in the curtain. When the clock read a little after 5, I decided I wasn't going to wait any longer. I got up, dressed quickly, and started gathering my things, still with that strange feeling that something had been interrupted, not finished. Before leaving, I stood still for a few seconds with my hand near the handle, listening. Nothing. I opened the door carefully and looked out at the empty parking lot. Outside, the morning air was cold and dry. The parking lot looked exactly as it had the night before. Few occupied spaces, no movement, no obvious sign that anyone had been there recently. Still, something on the door caught my attention when I turned to lock it. The lock had fresh marks around it, thin scratches on the metal, as if a key had been forced at the wrong angle several times. It wasn't something you'd notice from far away, but up close it was clear. I ran my finger over it carefully and felt the uneven texture. That hadn't been there before. I would have remembered. The idea that someone had tried to open that door with something that almost worked sent a slow chill through me, the kind that doesn't fade quickly. When I bent down to pick up my suitcase, I saw something on the ground near the base of the door. A torn piece of paper, wet on one end as if it had been on the ground all night. I picked it up and realized it was part of a simple note, ripped hastily. Written on it in pen was the room number. My room number. There was nothing else, no words, just the number, written clearly, without smudges. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at it in my hand, trying to understand how someone could mistake a room if they had the exact number written down. That erased any remaining doubt that this had been an innocent mistake. I slipped the paper into my pocket almost reflexively and went to the front desk to return the key. The morning clerk looked sleepy, shuffling papers, and didn't seem surprised when I mentioned that someone had tried to open my room during the night. He said something vague about confused people and asked what time I'd heard the noise. When I said it sounded like a key almost working, he looked up for a second and then went back to what he was doing. I asked if anyone else had complained that night. He said he didn't know and that the overnight shift was someone else. He didn't offer to call anyone or ask for details. That indifference bothered me more than if he had laughed. I left with the feeling that this kind of thing wasn't exactly new there. I got into my car and sat there for a few seconds before starting the engine. I looked down the row of rooms, trying to imagine where someone could have come from without being noticed. I didn't see anyone. There were no new cars, no open doors. I drove out of the parking lot, still replaying the sequence in my head. The key that almost worked. The long pauses. The immediate stop when I made noise. The paper with the room number. None of that matched someone at the wrong door. It felt like someone following a simple instruction with room for error, testing until they realized there would be no surprise that night. I left the motel before the sun had fully risen, driving without turning on the radio so there wouldn't be another sound occupying my head. The road was empty, the kind of emptiness that makes you feel exposed even inside a car. As the distance between me and the motel grew, I tried to convince myself that it had ended there. Still, the detail of the note wouldn't leave my mind. Someone had taken the care to write down the exact room number. It wasn't a random attempt going door to door. It was directed even if I would never know how or why. A few hours later, in another town, I stopped for coffee and caught myself automatically looking at doors and locks around me. It was a new, involuntary behavior. Every time someone approached a door behind me, my body went on alert. I thought about calling the local police near the motel, but realized I didn't have much to say beyond, "Someone tried to get in and left." There had been no confrontation, no real damage beyond the marks. Still, I knew it hadn't been nothing. It had been a test that got interrupted. A few days later, with it still fresh in my mind, I decided to look up local news from the area where I had stayed. I didn't find anything major, no headlines, but in a small travelers forum I saw a stray comment from weeks earlier. Someone complaining about key noises during the night at a motel along the same road. It didn't mention a room or an exact date, just said that someone tried to enter and stopped when they realized the guest was awake. Reading that gave me a physical sense of unease, because it confirmed it hadn't been an isolated case. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a pattern too small to make news, but repeated enough to leave traces. I started remembering details that hadn't stood out as much at the time. The fact that I hadn't seen anyone walking through the parking lot after the attempt stopped. The total absence of footsteps leaving. The absolute silence right after I turned on the light. I began to think that whoever had been there might not have come by car, or at least hadn't used the front parking lot. The motel bordered an open dirt area with easy access from the side. It was possible to reach the rooms without passing the front desk. That realization gave me a strange sense of vulnerability I hadn't noticed that night. That week I changed small habits without even realizing it. I started double-checking that the door was really locked, even in better hotels. At motels, I avoided ground floor rooms whenever I could. What bothered me most was remembering the precision. There was no random attempt, no rush. The key almost worked. The long pauses felt like calculation, not hesitation, and the fact that everything stopped the instant I made noise made it clear the person was alert to the smallest sign of reaction. This wasn't someone lost. It was someone willing to back off if they lost control of the situation. I also started paying more attention to how certain places function at night. Small motels, closed receptions, poorly lit side areas. Places designed for quick stops, not for staying or watching. The feeling that stayed with me was that I had unknowingly stepped into a setting already familiar to someone else. Someone who knew how to test doors, how to wait in silence, how to leave without being seen. The note with the room number remained the hardest detail to ignore. There was no excuse for that to exist if it had been a mistake. After some time, I stopped trying to imagine who the person on the other side of the door was. The face didn't matter. What stayed with me was the method. Someone with access to a key close enough to almost work. Someone who knew how to wait, listen, and stop at exactly the right moment. Someone who took the care to write down the room number before trying. It wasn't impulse or random opportunity. It was planned just enough to leave no obvious traces and simple enough not to draw attention if it failed. Thinking about that made me understand why the front desk clerk had reacted so casually. It had probably happened before, without consequences serious enough to become an official problem. To this day, when I stay in places like that, I remember that early morning in New Mexico. I remember the sound of the key turning almost to the right point, the long pauses in the dark, and the silence after I turned on the light. But what truly stuck with me was the image of that torn piece of paper on the ground, with the exact room number written on it. That erased any doubt that it was a mistake. It wasn't someone looking for just any door. It was someone trying that specific door at that specific time, counting on silence and on the fact that many people sleep too deeply to notice when something almost works. Knowing that they only didn't get in because I woke up in time is the detail that never lets this story feel small. Story 4. I was 41 years old when this happened, and I was living alone in a suburban house in a small town in Ohio. I had recently divorced and was still getting used to the silence of an empty house. It was a cul-de-sac, one of those very quiet streets with few houses and practically no movement at night. Everyone there recognized each other by sight, and nothing serious had ever happened in the neighborhood. I worked regular business hours and usually went to bed early, but that night I stayed up later watching TV, not very sleepy. The house was completely locked, the front lights were off, and only a lamp was on in the living room. Outside, the street was completely dark and silent. It must have been close to 11 at night when I heard someone knock on the front door. It wasn't an aggressive knock, but it wasn't too light either. 3 firm knocks, well spaced apart. That immediately put me on alert, because no one shows up there at that hour, especially unannounced. I went to the door without opening it and asked who it was. A man answered, saying he was from the electric company. He spoke calmly and directly, explaining that there was an urgent problem with the neighborhood transformer and that he needed to access my garage to check something quickly. His tone sounded professional, but something didn't add up. The electric company had never come out there at night before, much less without an identified vehicle or prior notice. I stood behind the door for a few seconds, trying to decide what to do. I asked why he needed to enter specifically through my garage. He said the closest access to the transformer was behind the houses, and that the issue needed to be resolved before the power went out. As he spoke, I noticed there were no typical work sounds outside. No truck running, no radio, no tools, just his voice and the silence of the street. I asked him to show some form of identification through the door window. There was a pause that was too short for someone supposedly looking for a badge. He replied that he wasn't wearing a full uniform because he'd been called in urgently. That was enough to make me even more suspicious. I said I wasn't comfortable opening the door and that if there was a real problem, I would call the electric company to confirm. His tone changed slightly. He didn't become aggressive, but he lost that layer of friendliness. He insisted there wasn't time for that and again asked to enter through the garage, not the house. That was when I decided to look through the side window of the living room, the one that gave a partial view of the garage entrance. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek outside, feeling my heart speed up even before I saw anything. Through the window, I could see part of the garage lit only by faint moonlight and a distant streetlight. That's when I saw the second man. He was standing in the shadow of the garage near the side, far too still to be there by chance. He wasn't wearing a uniform and wasn't holding any tools. He was just there, waiting. He wasn't looking at the house, but toward the back of the garage, as if he knew exactly where the interior door was. My stomach dropped instantly. I went back to the front door and said in a firmer tone that I wasn't going to open it, and that I was already calling the electric company and the police if necessary. On the other side, there was silence for a few seconds. No new explanation, no attempt to persuade me, just silence. After that, I heard footsteps moving away from the front door. They weren't fast or rushed, they were controlled steps heading toward the garage. I stood there in the dark living room listening, trying to understand whether they were leaving or just changing position. A few seconds later, I heard a light noise from the garage gate, as if someone had touched it to test it. There was no bang, no visible force, just that dry sound of metal being pressed and released. After that, everything went quiet again. No car started, no gate opened. I waited a long time before moving, with the clear feeling that someone could still be outside, just waiting for me to make a mistake. I stayed silent inside the house for a long time without turning on any lights. I didn't go to the door, didn't get close to the garage. I just listened. The street remained mute, as if nothing had happened. What bothered me most was not hearing anyone truly leave. No car starting, no engine driving away down the dead-end street. That created a strange feeling of suspension, as if the situation hadn't ended, only paused. I picked up my phone and held it in my hand, ready to call someone, but at the same time afraid that any movement or light might draw attention. After a time that felt far too long to be comfortable, I went to the bedroom and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed, listening to every creak of the house, every distant sound. At some point late into the night, I heard a low sound coming from the garage. It wasn't loud, it was almost a short metallic scratch, followed by another, as if someone were trying something very carefully to avoid making noise. My entire body tensed again. I didn't hear conversation, I didn't hear urgency. Just that light contact repeated once or twice, and then complete silence. The street was far too quiet for any of that to make sense. I waited until the sky began to lighten before leaving the bedroom. Every minute passed too slowly. When I finally felt it was safe to move, I went first to the front door and looked through the window. The street was empty, as it always is early in the morning. No cars parked out of place, no neighbors awake yet. Then I went to the garage carefully, turning on the light only after standing in front of the interior door. The gate was closed, but something seemed different. As I got closer, I saw fresh marks near the external lock, thin scratches in the metal, as if someone had used something to try to force it quietly. It wasn't old damage. The paint was scraped and there were small chips on the ground. I stood there looking at it for a few seconds, trying to organize my thoughts. The knock on the door, the transformer story, the specific request to enter through the garage, the second man standing in the dark. Everything now fit together in an unsettling way. This hadn't been a confused visit or a mistake. Someone had tried to create an urgent reason for me to open the garage, and when that didn't work, they tried another approach, quieter. The fact that they left without haste, without confrontation, only reinforced the sense that they were assessing, not improvising. That same morning, I called the electric company using the official number from their website. I explained the situation and asked if there had been any reported problem with the neighborhood transformer during the night. The representative checked and said there had been no such call, no emergency maintenance, and no crew sent to that area at that hour. That settled any doubt that might have remained. It hadn't been a lost employee or an off-protocol procedure. Someone had used a specific story to justify asking for access through the garage, knowing that many people see that space as separate from the house, less protected. Later, I spoke with a neighbor at the end of the street, someone who had lived there for more than 20 years. When I mentioned that 2 men had shown up claiming to be from the electric company, he became serious immediately. He said that months earlier, another house on the cul-de-sac had been targeted by a similar attempt, also at night, also with a request to access the garage. At the time, no one could prove anything, and the matter faded quickly. Hearing that gave me a silent confirmation of a pattern. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a repeated method, applied on quiet streets, counting on people's habit of trusting someone who shows up with a technical and urgent explanation. After that, I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of alert, as if the house itself had changed behavior. Every time I passed by the garage door, I automatically looked at the lock, expecting to see something different. I replaced the lock that same afternoon and installed a motion sensor light at the front and back of the house. Even so, the feeling of having been watched didn't go away. What bothered me most was the detail that they hadn't tried to enter through the house. From the beginning, the focus had been the garage, as if they knew exactly where they wanted to get to and were testing the quietest way to do it. That night I tried to go to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. Any noise from the street made me lift my head. I kept thinking about how the first man spoke to me, using generic terms, controlled urgency, without giving too many details. It was a story built not to raise immediate suspicion, but enough to justify haste. And the second man standing in the dark didn't feel improvised. He felt like someone positioned to act as soon as the garage was opened. The idea that it might have worked if I hadn't looked through the window made me physically uneasy. The following night, I woke up a few times thinking I'd heard something coming from the garage, but it was never anything concrete. Still, my body reacted as if it were. It was that constant state of alert, where any small noise feels too important. I started keeping my phone fully charged at all times and left a dim light on in the hallway, something I'd never done before. The house was physically the same, but the feeling was that someone had been there with a very clear purpose. It wasn't immediate fear. It was discomfort. The realization that someone had chosen that house on that dead-end street, counting on the isolation and the predictable routine of someone who lives alone. A few days later, while taking out the trash in the late afternoon, I noticed faint marks on the concrete near the side of the garage entrance. They weren't clear footprints, but enough to suggest someone had stood there, leaned there, maybe waiting. There was no way to know when those marks had been made, but after what had happened, it was impossible to ignore them. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the ground, feeling that same sensation from the night of the knock. It didn't feel random. It felt like someone had come back to check, to observe again, perhaps to see whether the house was still occupied or whether the resistance had only been temporary. After that, nothing else happened directly. No new knocks, no men on the street, no clear sounds coming from the garage. Still, The feeling didn't go away. What stayed with me wasn't the attempt itself, but the structure. Someone showed up with a technical explanation at a time when few people questioned things, asked for access through a less exposed part of the house, and had another person positioned outside my field of view. When that didn't work, they tried quietly without confrontation, without leaving obvious signs. Everything seemed designed to go unnoticed if it failed. And it did. Today, when I think back to that night, the detail that bothers me most is realizing how close it came to working. If I had opened the door without looking through the window, if I had accepted the Transformer story, if I had treated the garage as something separate from the house, I probably would have created exactly the opportunity they wanted. Knowing that has completely changed how I view urgent requests made at night. Danger doesn't always arrive with threats or violence. Sometimes it arrives politely, with a plausible explanation, waiting for you to open the right door on your own. Story 5. I was 36 years old when this happened, and I was traveling alone through rural Tennessee for work. It was one of those long trips, state highways, little traffic, and long stretches with no towns nearby. It was already night, probably close to 10 o'clock when my phone rang. It was a quick call, work-related, and the signal on the road was unstable. I saw a small scenic overlook on the side of the road, one of those simple ones, just a gravel area with a rusted sign indicating a panoramic view. I pulled in more out of convenience than any desire to enjoy the view. I turned off the car, left the window slightly open, and answered the call. The place was completely empty. No other cars parked, no lights except the distant headlights of a truck passing far below on the highway. The night was stuffy, with no wind, and sounds seemed to carry farther than they should. I spoke quietly on the phone, more out of habit than necessity. While listening to the person on the other end, I noticed lights approaching in the rearview mirror. A car entered the overlook slowly and stopped a few meters behind mine. What immediately caught my attention was that the headlights turned off as soon as it parked, but the engine stayed on. I watched through the mirror, trying not to seem too alert. I continued the call, trying to keep my voice normal, but my attention was no longer on it. In the rearview mirror, I could only see the dark silhouette of the car behind me, poorly defined in the dim light. I couldn't identify the model or color. The engine idling was noticeable, a constant sound that contrasted with the silence of the overlook. I thought the person might be waiting for someone, or maybe had just stopped there too. Still, the fact that they turned off the headlights immediately made me uncomfortable. I ended the call after a few minutes and stayed sitting in the car, phone still in hand, watching. No door opened. No one got out. The car simply stayed there, stopped running in the dark. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I checked the clock on the dashboard and realized it had been too long to be a coincidence. If the person were just using their phone, they would have left by now, or at least turned the headlights back on. Nothing changed. The car behind me didn't move an inch. I had that strange feeling of being watched without seeing by whom. I looked to the sides, ahead, then at the mirror again. There was no one else at the overlook, just the two of us. The silence began to weigh on me, and I felt a slight tightness in my chest, that internal warning that something wasn't right. I waited a few more minutes, trying to rationalize. I thought about starting the car and leaving just to test it, but something held me there, as if I didn't want to be the first to make a move. The other car's engine continued running, always at the same rhythm, not accelerating, not faltering. It was as if someone was willing to wait however long it took. At some point, I turned off my phone screen and left it on my lap, just watching. The clock marked 20 minutes since I had stopped. 20 minutes with no change. That stopped feeling like coincidence. It wasn't someone killing time. It was someone holding position. When I finally decided to leave, I started my car without haste, trying not to show nervousness. The instant my engine turned over, I heard the sound of the other engine change. It wasn't a natural delay. It was immediate, almost synchronized. In the rearview mirror, I saw the brake lights come on and the car adjust behind mine, still with its headlights off. My stomach dropped. I pulled out of the overlook slowly, rejoined the road, and the car followed, keeping exactly the same distance, not too close, not far enough to seem accidental. I continued along the road, trying to maintain a steady speed without doing anything abrupt. The stretch was dark, with few curves and practically no lighting. In the rearview mirror, I saw the car behind me like a solid shadow, always in the same position. If I sped up a little, it sped up too. If I slowed slightly, it matched me. It didn't use high beams, didn't try to pass, didn't get too close. That precision was what bothered me most. It didn't seem like someone lost or someone in a hurry. It felt like someone determined not to draw more attention than necessary, but also not to lose sight of me. After a few miles, I tried a simple test. I gradually reduced speed, like someone about to pull onto the shoulder. The car behind did exactly the same, maintaining the distance. When I accelerated again, it followed suit. That confirmed what I had already felt since the overlook. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't someone heading to the same place by chance. It was someone reacting to every decision I made in real time, as if waiting for me to do something specific. My entire body went on alert, and I began mentally calculating how far it was to a more populated area. The road felt longer than ever. Each sign showing the distance to the next town took forever to appear. I avoided looking too much in the rearview mirror so as not to draw attention, but a quick glance was enough to confirm the car was still there, in the same exact position. There was no attempt at communication, no honking, no flashing lights. Just that constant, silent presence. The idea of stopping to ask for help never crossed my mind. Stopping was exactly what I felt I shouldn't do. The feeling was that the car behind me was waiting for something simple, for me to become vulnerable. After what felt like much longer than it actually was, I began to see lights in the distance. A small urban area, nothing big, but with gas stations, open restaurants, and visible movement, even at night. As I approached, traffic increased slightly. Other cars appeared on the road coming from the opposite direction and the same direction. Only then did I notice a change. The car behind me began to stay a few meters farther back. Not much, but enough not to draw attention among other vehicles. Even so, it didn't immediately break off. I turned onto the first more brightly lit avenue I found, passing an open gas station and a 24-hour restaurant. I deliberately slowed down, blending into local traffic. When I looked in the rearview mirror again, the car was still there, but now it seemed to hesitate. A few seconds later, it changed lanes, continued straight on the main road, and disappeared among the other vehicles, without accelerating, without haste, as if it had simply decided that this was no longer the right place to continue. I sat still for a few seconds after pulling into the gas station parking lot, my heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. I only got out of the car when I saw other people walking around the station. I stayed near the entrance with the feeling that I needed to be visible. I bought a bottle of water, tried to act normal, but my hands were still trembling slightly. What bothered me most was realizing that nothing concrete had happened. No direct threat, no confrontation. Just someone who watched me, waited, and followed me until it was no longer safe to continue. That made it clear that the goal wasn't to reach a specific destination. It was to assess the right moment. I stayed there for a good while before returning to the car. When I finally continued my trip, I chose busier routes, even if they were longer. The rest of the night passed without incident, but the feeling didn't fade quickly. In the days that followed, the situation returned to my mind several times, especially the moment at the overlook. The car with its headlights off, engine running, waiting in silence. It didn't seem like someone impatient. It seemed like someone willing to wait as long as necessary until I fell asleep, turned off the car, or let my guard down. To this day, when I stop somewhere isolated at night, I pay attention to details I used to completely ignore. If someone turns off their headlights too early, if a car stays running too long without a clear reason, if someone reacts immediately to my movements. That night taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just watches, follows, and leaves when it realizes it has lost the opportunity. And the certainty that someone was waiting for something to happen, and that it only didn't because I moved at the right time, is what makes this memory impossible to ignore.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.